the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, where we discuss all things crypto related. Your host, Kieran Ryan.
There's an interesting development taking place across Africa where Bitcoin mining is helping many power grids achieve financial sustainability, mining Bitcoin as a buyer of last resort from these grids. Now, we've spoken before about how in 5 years Eskom could have wiped out its debt had it adopted Bitcoin mining during off-peak times. That would have been worth more than R500 billion. That's trillion with a T in today's terms. That very same model is now expanding in Africa, spearheaded by a company called Gridless Compute, which operates 6 mining sites in 4 countries using hydro, geothermal, and biomass as energy sources. And it was only a matter of time before Bitcoin miners entered the energy space, and that's precisely what Gridless Compute is doing. To find out more, we're joined by Eric Hersman, CEO of Gridless Compute. Hi, Eric. We spoke, I think it was about 2 years ago, and I suspect a lot has happened in the interim. Bring us up to date on what your Bitcoin mining activities in Africa bring us up to date on what has happened with your Bitcoin mining activities in Africa.
Yeah, Kieran, good to talk to you again. I think it's almost exactly 2 years. It was July of 2023 when I think we last had a conversation. So yeah, a lot has happened. When you first spoke with me, we were still in our first year of operation. We had, I think at that point, 2 sites set up. And in the interim, there's been 4 more sites set up. We're in Kenya, Zambia, and Malawi. And as you already mentioned, we find different partners, energy partners who have, stranded power. So they're usually, in fact, always renewable energy sources. So hydro, biomass, geothermal, and solar is on all of those sites as well, or on most of them. And what happens is they say, hey, listen, we've only been using 30% of our electricity for the local community and local businesses. We have not been able to find another anchor tenant to take up this other electricity. And we come in and we say, that's fine. We can put Bitcoin miners who use a lot of electricity to take up that excess. And then we share that Bitcoin that's earned with them. So they get a revenue split on it. And that's continued to grow. So the demand for this type of work, just because it actually brings financial sustainability to these companies, has continued to grow and prosper. I'll give you an example. When we talked 2 years ago, we hadn't even set up our Zambia operations yet. Yet in Zambia, in the first year of us being on site, there was 400 more families that got electricity and another 40 businesses that were able to be put on electricity as well. All because the power partners were able to pay for their own bills for the people who are making the electricity work day to day. So the line workers, they're able to fix transformers, they're able to put power, buy power meters and put them in more homes and businesses and expand the network. Now, Bitcoin mining is the buyer of last resort. That means we pay the least amount for energy. So all of those community members get that electricity first, and we end up mining less over time. So we then move those miners, those little computers, we move them to another site somewhere else. And it's worked brilliantly. So our partner is very happy. We're very happy. And we're continuing to find new opportunities all across the continent.
Right. I think you've raised an interesting point there. You, as the buyer of last resort, and as the community starts to use more and more power, you're kind of squeezed out of these arrangements. So you're all the time having to look for new energy sources. Is that right?
Well, anywhere in the world, nobody uses all their power. So there's stranded power everywhere. There's pockets of this wasted energy. So even in whether it's South Africa or whether it's the UK, there's always stranded power. So even in rural Zambia, while there's more people coming online, there's always a need for some of that kind of anchor tendency with Bitcoin mining, because as you think about it yourselves, like people turn off their lights at night, right? Businesses aren't running in the middle of the night. And so that energy is always available. So yes, what happens is we shrink the number of Bitcoin miners that we have in that location. We move them somewhere else. But it has also made us think more about the energy system as a whole and how it works, especially in off-grid rural Africa. And the numbers are kind of staggering. There's 600 million of the 800 million people in the world who don't have electricity are in Africa. And that doesn't mean that they can't afford it. That means there's no electricity for them to be had, even if they could afford it. And so, as gridless, we were looking at this problem. We're saying, well, gridless has shown that we can make off-grid energy a viable, investable, product, right? That this is something that can work. It's a worthy investment. But the model needs to change for how investment into off-grid energy works. It thus far has been mostly concessionary financing from the World Bank or Rockefeller Foundation or African Development Bank, things like that. But that's because it's been a bad investment. But our model clearly shows that it's not so any longer. What people would used to do was look for these long 20, 30-year power purchase agreements with the government to make it work. But now you don't need to. There's another anchor tenant, and that's Bitcoin mining, that can be the first buyer as well as the last buyer. So the buyer of first resort to start off with as the community grows into the energy usage, and then the buyer of last resort when there's pockets of wasted energy everywhere.
Now, I mentioned that you're entering the energy space yourself. In other words, you're going to have full control to some extent, full control over the value chain. And I presume you're looking at being both power generator and buyer of last resort for surplus energy. So tell us what you have in mind for that.
Yeah, so when we looked at this, we started looking at different sites. So there's two ways that gridless is entering into the ownership and the building of energy. And that's off-grid renewable energy is what we focus on. And that's first in finding old sites that are defunct or have not been maintained and just acquiring them. So there's a couple sites in, Rwanda, Congo, Zambia, Malawi, Kenya, the normal suspects that we just go in and we purchase and we fix them. So we'll fix the turbine, we'll fix the civil works, and we'll get it rolling again. The community is already there, and we can sell that power immediately to them. Now, the incentives are really, really well aligned here because Bitcoin doesn't pay very much, right? It pays the equivalent of about 7 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, people in rural Africa are paying upwards of 30 cents to $1 per kilowatt hour of electricity. So if they're willing to spend a penny more, right, 11 cents per kilowatt hour, we would much rather see that energy be sold to them because we get more money, like we make more money. So the incentives are aligned. And Bitcoin just becomes the fallback. And so, it's one of those situations where, again, incentives are aligned for the community in that they get power cheaper than they would anywhere else. We have the opportunity to build and then monetize from day one because the Bitcoin mining can be turned on from day one. So the full capacity is used from the very beginning. And then as the community comes online, we end up making better returns because they pay more than Bitcoin does. And so anytime there's a gap in that, Bitcoin fills it in, and we always have 100% capacity. So we're really excited about the building of energy now. And we think that there's a new paradigm, there's a new model for the building of energy in Africa. And we're excited that, yes, we'll be on the front edge of it, but that we're doing this as an open model. And this is why I'm very happy to speak freely to you about it, because we can't do all of the energy that's needed on the continent, nor should we try. So there should be other people who come along and copy the same model and do it themselves.
I was quite interested to hear what you said, that Bitcoin mining doesn't pay very well. Maybe just give us those figures again and explain why that is. I think there's another factor that's got to be introduced here. That's the hash rate. And you might just need to take us through the economics of Bitcoin mining.
Sure. So, we can get into some, terminology if you like, but it tends to confuse people who are not involved in Bitcoin mining. Even normal Bitcoiners get lost in this, which is, Bitcoin miners are actually just these computers, right? They're these shoebox-sized computers that have a lot of chips in them, and they just are doing compute cycles. We call that hash rate in our lingo, and typically the hash price is the hash rate that you commit in a day, but it's paid out over a petahash. So, however many millions of cycles you're running every second, really, and so typically that runs around $50 per petahash per day. At least it has been for the past few months. And that if you work out the math on that, how much energy you're using to make that money, it ends up being about 7 to 10 cents. It can be a little bit more. It can be a little bit less, but the mean is around 7 to 10 cents. We could call it 9 cents and say that's about even. So 9 cents per kilowatt hour is decent if you're the energy owner. If I'm trying to make margin on that, though, selling it to through somebody else, we have to split that, and it's not quite as profitable for either party, but it's doable, right? And this is what we've shown with Gridless to date. It's if you have no other buyer, this is a really, really good way to monetize your stranded power. The types of power are important to talk about too here, Kieran, because what we see is, when you have free inputs from hydro, from sun, from wind, it really matters how much time you're on, right? Geothermal and biomass as well, right? But wind and solar can be very intermittent. And, for solar, we know exactly how intermittent it is because we have day and nighttime cycles. Water is great because it's always running. Even when you have cyclical, rainy, dry seasons, you can predict that. And so we've chosen to focus more heavily on hydro. Small, rural, off-grid hydro is where we see the real opportunity. And that doesn't mean there's not opportunity in solar or in wind, but we feel like there's going to be a better return on investment when we look at hydro first.
Now, I mentioned in the beginning that Eskom, and this is something that we've discussed on our podcast before, that Eskom could have erased its 460 billion odd debt. It's probably higher than that now, had it gone into Bitcoin mining 5 years ago. I noticed recently the Ethiopian Electric Power Company says it raised $200 million from Bitcoin mining itself. So their revenue was generated by diverting electricity to Bitcoin mining, which was otherwise stranded or wasted due to a lack of transmission infrastructure. So the very cool thing about doing this type of Bitcoin mining is that you can be completely isolated. You could be in the middle of Congo where there is a hydro plant and it's not connected to any grid. But what you're actually doing is you are, in a sense, connecting to the grid because you're able to monetize what would be otherwise completely useless energy. Maybe just tell us about some of the developments that you see happening in Africa with this kind of energy production backed by Bitcoin as a buyer of last resort.
Well, just to focus on South Africa first, I don't have all the numbers for South Africa, but I believe 2024 was the first year in a while that you'd had more curtailment than you had, you'd had more stranded power than you had curtailment. For a number of years, there was a lot of curtailment happening because, you didn't have enough energy at the right times of day. And now you're getting into a position because of the investment made over the last few years that you're actually, in South Africa, there's more energy on the grid than there's the uptake of it, which happens in every country, right? And the more you have of that energy, the better, because it gets cheaper for businesses and individuals, and human progress flourishes as the cost of energy goes down, right? And so that's a good thing to have. That's a good problem to have. As I look at this, and I saw what happened in Ethiopia, we have a front row seat to it. I chair the Green Africa Mining Alliance for Bitcoin. And so we have a number of members who are in Ethiopia, and the Ethiopian government had a problem with distribution, and so they had just built their new GERD, the GERD dam, and have a surplus of energy, and they can't get it to where it needs to go. So in the interim, they allowed a bunch of Bitcoin miners. They went from 0 Bitcoin miners in January of last year to 600 megawatts of Bitcoin mining happening in 9 months' time. And the Ethiopian government didn't have to pay anything for that to happen. The Bitcoin miners came in, signed a power purchase agreement with them that gave them access to very low cost energy. They paid the capital costs to set up their own mining, and they cover their own operating costs to run it. So then anything that's made from that energy price to the government goes directly to the government without any operational costs to the government to maintain, manage, or capitalize it. And so it's a huge win for the Ethiopian government. Like you said, they've cleared somewhere around $200 million worth of returns on that mining. And yes, this is opening up the eyes for people around the continent. There's not probably a month that goes by that I don't have 2 or 3 conversations with ministers in different governments across Africa who are looking to do something similar with their wasted and stranded power. So that's only going to continue to grow. And I think that Africa will become a major player of hash rate position for Bitcoin globally over the years to come.
Right. It is interesting. I do understand that Eskom are looking at this. Eskom, our local power utility here, they are looking at Bitcoin mining as a possibility. How far that is gone, I don't know. But I think a few years ago, you would have been thrown out of the room, for even suggesting something like this. But it does open up interesting possibilities for private power producers as well. Going across Africa, suddenly they do have somebody who can take up the slack, during the off-peak hours, that you can have Bitcoin miners connected to your little mini grid. You mentioned something about the Green Energy Alliance. What is that?
Yeah, you can find it at gamma.africa online. So Gamma is the alliance of Bitcoin miners in Africa who use renewable clean energy to do the Bitcoin mining with. I think we're about 11 companies on it right now. We have an annual event that we do. This year it'll be in Zambia, and last year was in Ethiopia. The year before that was in Kenya, where those who are either IPPs or Bitcoin miners or the manufacturers of Bitcoin mining machines come together and have private meetings about the future in the space. And really, Gamma is also about the Bitcoin miners helping each other. So there's quite a bit of opportunity in Africa in this space. And by building a community of people who are oriented in their businesses around this, we help each other with suppliers, with manufacturers that we can work with, sometimes with the power purchase agreements that are being bandied about in different countries. Some organizations like Trojan Mining is in Nigeria. They're a good partner to work with in Nigeria. QRB Labs in Ethiopia, ourselves in Kenya. So there's different parties that are worth having conversations with to go into partnership with. And so as we get together as Gamma saying, okay, listen, you're interested in this country, you can go set up your own operations. You don't have to work with so-and-so, but you should at least talk to them to know what the lay of the land looks like, to get introductions to the minister or things like that. So we're trying to build a community that helps each other because at the end of the day, there's a huge amount of demand. Yes, there'll be some competition in some countries, but there's more than enough opportunity for everybody to be involved.
Right. How did you get involved in this? You did explain this to me 2 years ago, but update us on your journey into the Bitcoin mining space.
Yeah, I guess the background for me is that it's not immediately apparent from either my looks or my accent that I grew up in Kenya and Sudan. And then I started building tech companies here about 20 years ago. And the businesses I built started off in software and then got into hardware and then into infrastructure deployment of that hardware. And so really started to learn about how energy and internet connectivity are working in rural Africa. So in 2022 was interested in getting involved with Bitcoin as well and realized that probably the area that we had the most experience was in hardware and internet connectivity. And therefore, infrastructure for Bitcoin mining was something we had a competitive advantage in. And so we started looking into it more and more and realized it's a bunch of really dumb computers that are not well made that you have to maintain and run in rural Africa. We already had a lot of experience with doing that kind of thing. And so we put together some money, bought our first miners, deployed them. For us, the garage story is it was just 6 miners, 20 kilowatts of energy being utilized in a small hydro facility that was only 50 kilowatts in size in Kenya, saying, okay, yeah, this can work. We can see how this works, and then growing from there.
So from 6 miners to what? What is your total now across all of these 6 countries?
Well, so currently we're operating these 6 sites. It's about 3 megawatts of energy we're currently working. By the end of this year, we're going to be, I think we're adding, let me do the numbers real quick. We're adding 25 megawatts in this calendar year. So we're growing quite a bit this year. And that doesn't count what energy we're building.
So you're going from 3 megawatts to 25 megawatts?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, finally, Eric, what's next? You mentioned this is your big year for growth. Is there any interest in South Africa yet, given the explosion in solar power plants? And I know you did say that there are possibilities with solar, but I think your first choice would be hydro. And there isn't a lot of hydro in South Africa.
Yeah. So, I, first of all, would be very happy to be involved in South Africa. We tend to be mostly East and Southern Africa oriented in our operations. So South Africa would be fantastic to be in. We've talked to a number of energy partners in South Africa over the past couple of years since you and I chatted. And you're right, a lot of them are solar, right? And so, or wind. And the possibilities are there, but they've been challenging because of the intermittency. When you only have at most 8 hours of solar energy in a day, that means you have to invest a lot in batteries to have enough value return. You can still get a return on investment with solar. It's just that it takes 2 or 3 times as long. So what I'm excited about is that I see, and we're working on some new potential solar options that I think will give people more return. And I don't actually think it requires gridless to be involved. So we're working on an open source module, if you will, that will turn stranded solar energy into real-time mining so that it can work for farmers or ranchers who are doing as little as 20 or 30 kilowatts of solar panels. It doesn't make any sense for them to have a third party like gridless involved. But if they can have an open source stack of software and this module that will go between the power controller and the Bitcoin mining controller, then they can optimize and actually make enough return on investment that it actually pays back their solar investment as well over time. And I think it's interesting because then it earns them Bitcoin as well as it helps decentralize the Bitcoin network, which is something that's really valuable for everybody. Everybody in Bitcoin wants to have a fully decentralized Bitcoin network so that it's not geographically bound to just US or China or places like that. We need to have it decentralized across the world. And I think going across into more countries in Africa and more small scale deployments of Bitcoin mining is going to be equally important.
Fascinating discussion. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, Eric, for joining us on the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, and look forward to catching up with you again in the not too distant future.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, hosted by Kieran Ryan. To listen to our other podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates.